first of all, I want to say, as another Ohio State fan, I will say this. I do think, Tim, from your perspective, that USC is absolutely trending in the right direction. I think I've already said that to you before. But I mean, I think what you're starting to see is, and I don't think that there's a pattern with Riley teams. And I'm not saying he can't build a really good defense there. And I put this in the chat, but what is your confidence? And maybe you've already stated this, but bottom line in Grinch.
I don't have confidence in Grinch after what kind of made someone made a point that it was almost like it was right in front of my face, and I was just really seeing what I wanted to see. I'm not saying he can't be. I'm saying at this point, it appears to me you can't. The USC fans, what we've been saying is, oh, he just needs his right pieces. He just needs the right pieces. He just needs the right pieces. The problem is that, do we think that Tulane had better pieces? You know, it's like, do you think the talent, and I will tell you this, I think the talent, I'm not downplaying the talent. We're talking about TCU with team speed and athletes. You know, that kid Watts, that receiver, that guy could play on a number of teams, man. And then how I already forgotten the running back's name. Spears. I think I'm thinking in shock. I mean, that kid, I mean, he could play on almost any team in the country, you know? So by saying they didn't have any talent, no, but do they have talent wise? I mean, how many top recruiting classes have they had? So I'm a bit concerned that he wasn't able to put together a more effective defense than we saw in that Cotton Bowl, right? I mean, I think that's an indictment. You can't really argue is you had time to prepare. Your team is as healthy as it's been all year. Yeah, there were some dinged up players on defense, but they all got healthy for that game. And that was the product. Now, it's been these if you look, they've been these games where USC falls apart. I mean, it gets a bad Cal team and a bad Cal defense. Right. There's an onside kick, a couple long throws, and boom, they're right back in the game when USC was up 21 points. It's these collapses that I've seen from him that they're a bit concerning, to say the least. But you know, at the same time, also, whatever happened in that game, it was just a mess. It was a collapse. And I think the collapse has to come to the coaching at some level. You know, you got to put your players in a position to close out games. And I think that is coaching.
Well, I mean, the bottom line is this. I mean, you know, well, first of all, I just want to say we had Grinch here, obviously, at Ohio State. And that was 2018. That was, you know, one of our bad defenses, by the way. That was the last year of the Urban Meyer era, of course. And we barely got through that season. And the only reason that we had the success we had that year is we had maybe the greatest season an Ohio State quarterback ever has, with Haskins' 50 touchdown passes that year, the late Dwayne Haskins, where, I mean, Mark remembers it. I mean, they had to gut out a lot of close wins that year, and we needed every single one of those 50 touchdowns to have the type of season that we had. Now, I do think that the 18 defense was more of a, I put more of it on Schiano than I do Grinch, to be perfectly honest with you. And I think Mark could probably recall there was a lot of Ohio State fan base that was really anti-Schiano at that point rather than Grinch, wouldn't you say, Mark?
Well, I would say the thing about Schiano was that we learned was that his scheme was, he was very rigid and unbending in that it had to be this NFL complexity level defense, and he didn't back off of that and let the players play and simplify the defense and let them soak it in and be able to perform with freedom out there.
Was that the first year of that defense? Were they installing a new defense, right? They brought, correct or incorrect?
Yeah. Well, I mean, they had Schiano for a few years. Here's the thing. I mean, their 17 defense, I mean, wasn't that bad. I mean, I that year, well, I say a few things. Number one, and obviously we can't make injuries. And I was just on with Uncle Lou. You can never make injuries as an excuse, of course, even if it's like an all-time player that you lose, of course. But anyway, losing Nick Bosa that year was a big deal. I want to say that. Because I would have loved to have seen Nick Bosa play with Chase Young. That would have been fun to have watched. But the back seven of that defense wasn't very good. Their linebacker play that year was not really good. Now, I think a lot of that was on the coaching, though, because they had a lot of players playing out of position, and we could not stop the run that year. Remember that game where Maryland ran up and down the field with us with McFarland's son had a huge game against us, and we barely survived the late 2-point conversion. So, yeah, and to be fair, um, I would not have used Grinch as the fall guy for that defense. I think, some of it was Shiano and some of it was our other position coaches. We had a terrible linebacker coach in Bill Davis who only got the job because he was the best man in Urban Meyer's wedding. I still believe that to this day. Talk about, buddy getting a job. But yeah, I think that there were some, to your point, Tim, I think there were some bad staff moves that year. And I was actually more against Shiano than I was against Grinch, is the long and short of what I'm saying.
Well, I think that that of all years, there've been enough criticism and reasons to criticize Grinch. I don't think a guy coming in 1 year with this, you lost your head coach. I mean, there's a lot going into the season. There's a lot of turmoil around that team. And you just said you lost Bosa. There was a lot going on there. So I don't think you can really evaluate his role that year. I don't think too strongly, but there are strong reasons for indictments when he was at Oklahoma, because again, the same thing I talked about USC applies over to Oklahoma. Sure, they probably didn't have the best talent on defense, but you got to think they had better talent than most of the teams in the Big 12. So at some point you have to realize, is it working? And he did have a couple of years. The defense for him this year is the fact that this is his first year. And and I will tell everybody out there in chat land and both you guys that there was a lot to turn around culture wise. It was a mess. It was an absolute mess. I'm just saying he had the whole year. I didn't see it trending in a good direction. And there is kind of an indictment on the fact that he just could not stop that defense at all.
Well,
even
the
with
the point that you make about the trajectory of the season, that's the worst part of it, because you should be improving as the season goes on, of course, and they play their best defense early in the season. And then the other thing is that, as you know, Tim, they had historically maybe the worst defense in USC history the year before. And although they didn't come anywhere close to supplementing the defense like they did the offense, they had some key transfer portal additions to kind of patchwork the defense that you would have expected, like quality players that you would have expected them to be reasonably better. And they were just as bad statistically this year as the year before, if not worse. They're 124th in yards per play.
Yeah, the score per game got better. There was a huge hole, and I could thank Larry Pilgrim and the Utes for showing the entire country that the middle of USC defense, not that any offensive coordinator was going to find this out anyway, was just a sieve. The linebacking play was just absolutely terrible, and they showed that middle of the field, especially with the tight end. What was it? Kincaid had like 85 catches for 4,000 yards in that game. I can't remember, but it just showed there's a hole there. That
234 comes to mind. Yeah,
something like that.
A zillion.
And the fact is we played the best teams towards the end of the year as well, though. So you got to also keep that in mind. So there's this thing where, I'm not making a defense for him. I think unfortunately, we're not going to get, I'll tell you what, I said that you guys be scared of us. If USC got Jim Leonard, you guys should better be scared of us. If that happened, I don't see it happening. I think he's going to the NFL, but if USC landed Jim Leonard, his ability to recruit and you can't downplay the fact, knowing high schools and recruiting, if we can get defensive linemen and linebackers from the Midwest with his touches and his defense with Riley's offense, I think that'd be pretty formidable in any conference, any division.
Well, I was going to say the one thing about these bowl games too, Tim, if you have 30 days to prep for some of these bowl games, and you're running up against really good offenses, I was going to ask this question. I didn't get a chance. I was on Uncle Lou the other day. We faced Georgia. Mark, just bottom line, is your feeling that this Georgia team is anywhere close to where they were a year ago? Do you think? Because I think they may be better offensively, but not as good defensively.
Yeah, I think, well, basically offensively, it's so close that it's negligible. They might be a little bit better. Maybe Stetson Bennett is
that's
a better caretaker of the ball, possibly. But besides that, certainly Arian Smith, who tore up the Buckeyes, is more of a factor this season than what they had. But they had George Pickens last year, so it's more defense. Yeah, that defense last year was historically good versus this defense. I still think it's the best defense in the country, I think, but it's debatable.
But what we said, Mark, if you find the right quarterback and the right group of receivers, you can exploit any defense. You know what I mean? This goes back to the Saban years. What happened when Saban ran? And this kind of gives credence to what Tim was saying about, maybe the level of quarterback play and skill players in your conference. I mean, if you run up against, the right quarterback, I mean, all those years, who was beating Saban defenses?
Yeah.
It was
Cam
usually the
Newton,
hot,
Johnny Manziel. Yeah.
right, right, right. It was that hot quarterback that they would run into that, maybe the team didn't have the all-around talent, but, they ran into that hot quarterback with a group of receivers that just was able to exploit that defense. And, I do think that you get into these playoff games, a lot of them do become like this, high-scoring games where, maybe if you can get a red zone stop or a turnover or two, in a lot of instances, that's what you're kind of hoping for.
Yeah. The skill level of the throwers and catchers across the board in college football is so much higher than it was 10 or 15 years ago by many more teams.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why I said, if you think about it, Georgia was last year winning it with a defensive-oriented team was kind of an outlier after the previous 3 national champions.
Yeah.
With 18 Clemson, 19 LSU, and 20 Alabama were all offensive-oriented teams.
Yeah. So anybody's defensive approach kind of falls into 2 categories. One, either we're coming after you. We think we've got the kind of athletes. We can come after you, and we'll get burned during the course of a game, but we'll also create havoc plays. Or we're just going to sit back and we'll tackle in space and we'll wait for you to make a mistake, get behind the sticks, or do something that's going to bog down your offense, and we'll take advantage just by stopping you because you've stopped yourself via penalty or something that's going to happen during the course of a 75-yard drive.
Right. Try and make teams take the long route as best as you can, and a penalty, a sack, or right.
Quarterback's going to throw the ball in. Yeah, exactly.
Right. Hey, Tim, I watched your game, by the way, against Tulane. I think that special teams cost you the end of that game as much as your defense did.
Yeah. You can't account for a guy dropping the ball to the 2-yard line. Yeah. It literally would have been better if he would have fumbled it and then they would have picked it up and ran in for a touchdown. Because that was literally the only way they could, really win that game.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The safety is the one play that, even though it's the least amount of points, you have to give the ball back. It's the only time that you can score that you then also get the ball as well. So you've created 2 possessions basically in terms of scoring.
Well, and another thing is if they would have, so they moved the ball in that one. I mean, they got the ball to the 36 on a kick return, and they threw a touchdown pass on that post, whatever route the guy took, and he was just gone, and that was one play. And then they kick it off, and then they get the safety, and then they punt it out. And then I'll tell you what, fans always bitch about it, but man, if you really do, if you're a Trojan fan out there and you actually have the stomach to do it, go back and watch 3rd and 10, 4th and 10. The left tackle literally tackles Tuipulotu twice on those 2 plays. It was pretty painful. But again, as my buddy Chris, the UCLA fan, told me, holding happens all the time. But if you guys watch these 2 plays, our referees with the Southern accent sure as heck did not do us any favors on those 2 calls. So,
hey,
that's
Tim,
they won. Good job, Tulane.
Tim, I can verify that all the Georgia fans have accused Ohio State of holding on every single play because they didn't get 85 sacks in that game. That's been like a predominant theory out there. Hey,
the 3rd and 10 I'm talking about, the guy literally, it wasn't his hands got outside the frame. The guy literally wrapped his arm around him and was pulling him from behind as he's trying to get the quarterback. I was just like, oh my God, are you kidding me? But anyway.
Is he coming back?
No. And he shouldn't. I mean, he'll be a day 1 guy. I think he'd be a 2nd round draft pick. He'll be a good player.